Hey everyone, let's just jump right in with a scenario that, well, it might feel a little too familiar. You're staring at your computer screen, you've got an empty email draft open, and there's just that simple, rhythmic, blinking cursor. Flash, flash, flash. It's actually a pretty powerful starting point for us today. Because for so many high-achieving, deeply caring people, that tiny little blinking line, it represents a massive, absolutely insurmountable wall. You sit there staring at it, right? And you ask yourself, why on earth does this one simple task feel impossible right now? I mean, you have the time, you know exactly what you need to type, and yet you are completely frozen. Let me guess, your inner critic probably chimes in immediately. It calls you lazy. It tells you this paralysis is just a moral failing or a lack of discipline or some kind of character flaw. But what if that inner critic is completely wrong? Let's explore why burnout perfectly mimics laziness from the outside, but is fundamentally entirely different on the inside. All right, Section 1, the World Health Organization's definition. To shift our perspective away from all that harsh self-judgment and look at the actual clinical reality, let's check out the World Health Organization's official definition. They classify burnout as an occupational phenomenon. And notice the language they use here. It results from chronic stress that has not been successfully managed, which leads to exhaustion, mental distance, and reduced efficacy. It's kind of like, imagine a towering stack of heavy workplace tasks slowly pressing down, and as they do, they just dissolve into a completely drained battery. Burnout isn't just feeling a bit tired after a long Tuesday. It is a profound state of systemic depletion. Literally, it's what happens when your internal resources are drained way, way faster than they can possibly recover. Moving on to Section 2, willingness versus capacity.
So to truly understand why you're feeling stuck, we really have to separate your desire to do the work from your actual physical ability to do it. Think of laziness as a willingness problem. Imagine a fully charged battery, right? But the person simply chooses to flip the switch to off. The fuel is in the tank, the system is totally healthy, but they just don't want to put in the effort. Now, burnout, on the other hand, is a capacity problem. It is a completely drained battery, the switch is firmly pressed on, you desperately want the machine to work, but the system is just entirely depleted. The intention is absolutely there, but the neurochemical energy to actually execute the action, it's just gone.
Okay, Section 3, 6 signs of burnout. So how do we actually spot the difference in our daily lives? Well, let's take a warm, honest look at our own recent experiences. First up, we have what neuropsychologists call the somatic circuit breaker. This literally feels like an invisible wall blocking you from doing the simplest tasks, like washing a single dish or just hitting reply to an email. Your brain's intention centers are firing, but the chemical signal just fails to reach your motor networks. You're frozen. And second, there's mental fog. Imagine trying to look out of a really heavily foggy window. That's kind of what your cognition feels like. It's not a lack of effort. Your brain is actually struggling with attention slips, memory retrieval, and way slower processing speeds, all thanks to chronic cortisol exposure. Our third sign is something called flat rest. Picture a dim lamp that you keep plugging in, but it simply won't brighten up. That is exactly what sleep feels like in burnout. I mean, you can sleep for 10 hours and still wake up feeling like you just ran a marathon. The rest just isn't restorative anymore. Fourth is going through the motions, also known as depersonalization. Visually, just think of slow, gray gears grinding along on autopilot. You feel disconnected, numb, and emotionally distant from your work, your hobbies, and maybe even the people you used to care deeply about. And when your capacity is completely drained, small things start to feel monumental. Your brain feels like a web browser with like 70 overloaded tabs open all at once, freezing the whole system. And here's the real kicker. Unlike laziness, which is honestly usually pretty comfortable and carefree, burnout traps you in this endlessly spinning guilt loop. You're mentally paralyzed, but internally, you are frantically agonizing over your inability to move, just constantly blaming yourself. Look, a lazy person doesn't feel agonizing guilt about resting, but a burnt-out person, they feel guilty every single second they aren't working. Let's look at Section 4, stress, tiredness, or depression. Understanding your own specific internal landscape is really the first step toward actual recovery. So it's vital we sort burnout out from other overlapping conditions. Think of stress as a feeling of too much. You feel like you're drowning in responsibilities, sure, but you still believe that if you just paddle hard enough, you'll survive. Burnout, conversely, is not enough. You feel dried up, empty, totally devoid of motivation. Now, tiredness, that's simply a state that resolves with a good, solid weekend of rest and recuperation. And depression is a clinical condition that pervasively affects all areas of your life, not just your job or caregiving roles, and it doesn't just lift by taking a vacation or changing your environment. All right, Section 5, questions for self-reflection. Let's move into a space of, well, compassionate introspection here. Not to diagnose anything, but just to understand what your body is desperately trying to tell you. This is known as the clinical capacity query. Let me ask you, if you had a month off with 0 negative consequences, what would you do? A fundamentally lazy person, or maybe someone who just needs a quick break, would probably immediately think of picking up neglected fun. Picture dusty hobby objects, a guitar, a paintbrush, hiking boots, finally being dusted off and used. But a burnt-out person? Honestly, a burnt-out person usually answers that they just run a lie in a dark, quiet room. They desperately need sensory withdrawal, silence, and sleep just to recover their basic functioning. Here is our second reflection question. Imagine you're walking through life carrying this incredibly heavy, invisible backpack. Every time you say yes when you really mean no, a rock goes in. Every time your perfectionism demands a flawless outcome, another rock. Every time you carry the emotional weight of your workplace, more rocks. You see, you haven't suddenly forgotten how to walk. The load has just become unbearable. To lighten that load, we have to start breaking tasks down into the tiniest possible pieces. Not clean the whole house, but maybe just pick up one piece of paper. And finally, Section 6, a gentle closing thought. As we wrap up today's explainer, let's move away from those heavy metaphors of invisible walls and drained batteries. Instead, visualize a quiet, dark room that is very, very slowly becoming brighter and warmer as the sun gently rises. Now, just a quick educational reminder. This explainer is strictly for informational purposes, not medical advice. But please, hear me on this. If you recognize yourself today, your struggle is a real physiological and neurobiological response to carrying way too much for way too long. It demands care, structured rest, and setting boundaries. It is absolutely not a character flaw that demands harsh discipline. You are exhausted. You are not lazy. We're going to end with this incredibly powerful quote. Burnout doesn't heal by powering through. It heals with permission to pause. I really hope this explainer leaves you with a profound sense of self-forgiveness and the hope that by understanding your own internal mechanisms, you can actually start the journey back to full capacity. So I'll leave you with one final thought to ponder today. If you finally stopped calling yourself lazy, how much more gently would you treat yourself tomorrow?